On March 14, 1871, Sheriff Thomas Wardell placed a noose around the neck of convicted murderer Samuel Pritchard and watched him drop through the gallows floor in Crawford County, Arkansas. The county physician confirmed death at 11:47 that morning. 3 days later, Sheriff Wardell found the same man standing in his kitchen at midnight, rope burns still fresh on his neck, asking why he'd been killed for a crime he didn't commit. What followed would force the sheriff to hang Samuel Pritchard a second time, and the events that unfolded would haunt Crawford County for generations to come. The winter of 1871 brought more than cold to the farmlands outside Van Buren, Arkansas. It brought Samuel Pritchard. Pritchard arrived in Crawford County sometime in early January, though nobody could agree on the exact date. He took work as a farmhand on the Blackwell property, a modest homestead 3 miles west of town. The Blackwells, William and Margaret, had been struggling since their son died of fever the previous autumn. They needed help, and Pritchard needed wages. The arrangement seemed simple enough. According to Margaret Blackwell's diary, recovered after the events that followed, Pritchard was a quiet man who kept to himself. He attended Sunday services at the Presbyterian Church, didn't drink, and worked harder than any hand they'd employed before. "He seems haunted by something," she wrote on January 28th. "His eyes carry a weight I cannot name." On February 9th, William Blackwell was found dead in his barn. The scene troubled even the most seasoned members of the community. Blackwell had been beaten severely, his skull fractured in 3 places. The county coroner, Dr. Edwin Hayes, noted in his report that the injuries suggested extreme violence committed by someone in a state of rage or terror. A bloodied shovel lay nearby. The town marshal, Deputy Clay Hutchins, arrested Samuel Pritchard that same afternoon. The evidence seemed clear. Pritchard's coat carried bloodstains. He had no solid account of his whereabouts during the suspected time of death, and several witnesses claimed to have heard raised voices coming from the Blackwell property the night before. The trial lasted 2 days. Circuit Judge Harrison Moreland presided, and the prosecution built their case on circumstantial evidence that, in 1871 Arkansas, proved sufficient for conviction. Pritchard maintained his innocence throughout, his defense simple and unwavering. "I was mending fence on the eastern property line," he testified. "I heard nothing. I saw nothing. When I returned to the barn, Mr. Blackwell was already dead. I tried to help him. That's how I got blood on my coat." No one believed him. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict. Judge Moreland sentenced Samuel Pritchard to death by hanging, the execution to be carried out by Sheriff Thomas Wardell on March 14th. Sheriff Wardell had served Crawford County for 6 years. He was known as a fair man, one who followed the law precisely. His personal journal, discovered decades later in the county archives, reveals a man deeply troubled by the execution he was ordered to carry out. "Pritchard does not carry himself as a guilty man," Wardell wrote on March 10th. "Yet the law has spoken, and I am its instrument." The execution took place at dawn on March 14th, behind the county courthouse. Approximately 40 townspeople gathered to witness. Reverend Paul Sweetwater offered final prayers. Pritchard was given the opportunity to speak. "I am innocent of William Blackwell's murder," he said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "But I understand that innocence matters little when men have already decided your guilt. I ask only this: when the truth is known, remember that justice delayed is not justice at all." At 11:43 a.m., Sheriff Wardell pulled the lever. Samuel Pritchard dropped. His neck broke cleanly. Dr. Hayes examined the body at 11:47 and pronounced death. The body was cut down, placed in a pine coffin, and transported to the county cemetery for burial that afternoon. 6 men witnessed the burial, including Sheriff Wardell himself. The case appeared closed. 3 days later, everything changed. Sheriff Wardell lived alone in a modest house behind the county jail. His wife had died of consumption 2 years prior, and he'd never remarried. On the night of March 17th, he returned home late after investigating a property dispute near Alma. He stabled his horse, entered through the back door, and lit an oil lamp in his kitchen. Samuel Pritchard was sitting at his table. In his journal, Wardell described the encounter in detail. The man I had hanged 3 days prior sat in my kitchen as if waiting for tea. The rope burns on his neck were visible in the lamplight, dark bruises that circled his throat. He wore the same clothes he'd been buried in. His eyes held no malice, only a terrible sadness. I confess I stood frozen, unable to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew to be true.
"Sheriff," Pritchard said, "I need you to understand something. I didn't kill William Blackwell, but someone did, and they're going to kill again."
Wardell's first instinct was to reach for his gun, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the calm in Pritchard's voice. Perhaps it was the impossible nature of what he was witnessing. In his journal, he admits, "I have never believed in spirits or hauntings. I am a man of reason and law." Yet here sat a man I had personally watched die, speaking to me as plainly as any living soul. "Who killed Blackwell?" Wardell asked. "His wife," Pritchard replied. "Margaret Blackwell. I saw her that night, Sheriff. I saw her leave the barn covered in her husband's blood. She saw me too. That's why I'm dead." Before you assume anything, stay with this, because what happened next proved Pritchard was telling the truth. Pritchard explained that he'd been working late on the eastern fence line, exactly as he'd testified. He'd been returning to the barn around 10 that evening when he saw Margaret Blackwell emerge from the structure, her dress and hands stained dark. She'd been carrying the shovel. When she saw Pritchard standing there in the moonlight, her expression had shifted from shock to calculation in seconds. "She knew I'd seen her," Pritchard told the sheriff. "She went inside the house and screamed for help. By the time I reached the barn, Mr. Blackwell was already beyond saving. She'd made sure of that, and she'd made sure I'd be blamed." Wardell struggled to process this. Why would Margaret Blackwell murder her own husband? "I don't know," Pritchard admitted. "But I know she did it, and I know she's not finished. There's something wrong in that house, Sheriff. Something that drove her to violence. And whatever it is, it's still there." The sheriff sat down across from the dead man at his kitchen table. "If you're truly here, if this isn't fever or madness, then prove it. Tell me something only you would know." Pritchard thought for a moment. "In your right coat pocket, you carry a pocket watch, silver case, engraved with initials EMW. It belonged to your wife, Elizabeth. You wind it every morning at exactly 6 o'clock, even though it keeps perfect time, because she used to wind it at 6 every morning when she was alive. You've never told anyone about this habit." Wardell reached into his pocket and pulled out the watch. His hand trembled. "How do you know this?" "Because I've been watching you, Sheriff. Not in life, but in these 3 days since you hanged me. When you're dead for crimes you didn't commit, you get certain privileges. The veil becomes thin. I needed to understand who you were before I came to you with this. I needed to know if you were a man who could accept the truth, no matter how impossible it seemed." There are moments in any investigation where you have to decide what you're willing to believe. This was Sheriff Wardell's moment. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Go to the Blackwell property," Pritchard said. "Search the house.
You'll find evidence Margaret Blackwell has been planning something for months. And Sheriff, you need to go tonight, because whatever she started, she's about to finish it."
Pritchard stood from the table. In the lamplight, Wardell could see he was slightly transparent, as if he existed in this world but not fully. "I can't rest until this is made right," Pritchard said. "I was hanged for a crime I didn't commit. That kind of injustice, it leaves a mark on the world. It creates a debt that must be paid."
"What happens if I find proof?" Wardell asked. "What happens to you?"
"Then you'll have to hang me again," Pritchard replied. "But this time, it'll be justice." With that, Samuel Pritchard faded from view, leaving Sheriff Wardell alone in his kitchen with a choice to make. An hour later, Wardell arrived at the Blackwell property with Deputy Hutchins and a lantern. Margaret Blackwell answered the door in her nightclothes, claiming surprise at the late visit. "I'm here on official business," Wardell told her. "I need to search your home." "On what grounds?" Margaret asked. but her voice carried an edge that Wardell hadn't noticed before. "On the grounds that I'm the sheriff, and I don't need grounds." What they found in the house's cellar changed everything. Behind a false wall, poorly concealed, they discovered evidence of arsenic poisoning, letters from a man named James Whitmore expressing romantic interest, and a detailed plan to sell the Blackwell property and relocate to St. Louis. The letters dated back 8 months. Margaret Blackwell had been planning her husband's death long before Samuel Pritchard ever arrived in Crawford County. But there was more. In a locked trunk, they found journals documenting Margaret's descent into what could only be described as obsession. She'd convinced herself that her husband was an obstacle to her happiness, that his death was not just desirable but necessary. The final entry, dated March 13th, the day before Pritchard's execution, read, "It is done. The farmhand will hang, and I will be free. Justice has served my purposes well." Margaret Blackwell was arrested that night. She confessed within hours, perhaps relieved to finally speak the truth. She'd been poisoning her husband with small doses of arsenic for weeks, making him sick enough to seem ill but not enough to kill him quickly. On February 9th, she'd lost patience and finished the job with a shovel. When Pritchard witnessed her leaving the barn, she'd immediately understood how to redirect blame. The trial was swift. Margaret Blackwell was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. She died there 6 years later, reportedly claiming in her final moments that something had whispered to her from the walls of her house, encouraging her toward violence. But this isn't where the story ends, because Sheriff Wardell still had a promise to keep. On April 2nd, 1871, Samuel Pritchard appeared in Wardell's kitchen a second time. "You found the truth," he said. "Now you need to finish what you started."
"You want me to hang you again?" Wardell said. It wasn't a question.
"I need you to," Pritchard replied. "I can't move on until the scales are balanced. I was executed for a crime I didn't commit. That injustice tore a hole in the natural order. The only way to mend it is to complete the execution properly, with truth instead of lies." Wardell struggled with this. "How do I hang a man who's already dead?" "The same way you'd hang a living man," Pritchard said. "My spirit is bound to this world by the injustice of my death. Give me the execution I was owed, with the truth spoken plainly, and I'll finally be free." On April 8th, 1871, Sheriff Thomas Wardell performed the most unusual duty of his career. He returned to the gallows behind the courthouse. No crowd gathered this time. Only Deputy Hutchins and Reverend Sweetwater stood witness, both sworn to secrecy about what they were about to see. Samuel Pritchard's spirit materialized on the platform at dawn. Wardell placed the noose around his neck with trembling hands. "Samuel Pritchard," he said formally, "you were wrongly executed for the murder of William Blackwell. The true killer has been brought to justice. This execution is performed not as punishment, but as release. May you find the peace that was stolen from you." Reverend Sweetwater spoke prayers for the dead, and then Sheriff Wardell pulled the lever a second time. According to the accounts left by both Wardell and Hutchins, what happened next defied explanation. As Pritchard's spirit dropped through the gallows floor, a brilliant light surrounded him. The rope burns on his neck faded. His transparent form became solid for just a moment, and then dispersed like morning fog in sunlight. "He smiled," Deputy Hutchins wrote in his own account. Just before he vanished, Samuel Pritchard smiled. It was the expression of a man finally unburdened. The gallows behind the Crawford County Courthouse were dismantled the following week. Sheriff Wardell served another 12 years before retiring. His journal, discovered in 1923, provides the most complete account of these events, though many dismissed it as the writings of a man touched by madness. But here's what you need to know about the Blackwell property. After Margaret's conviction, the house stood empty for 18 months. Then a family named Morrison purchased it in late 1872. They lasted 4 months before abandoning the property, claiming they heard voices in the walls at night. 3 more families tried to make a home there between 1873 and 1881. None stayed longer than a year. In 1883, the house burned to the foundation under mysterious circumstances. No cause was ever determined. The property has remained vacant since, the land returning to wilderness. But locals still report strange occurrences near the old foundation, particularly in March around the anniversary of Pritchard's first execution. People claim to see a figure standing where the barn once stood, always at dusk, always watching. The figure never moves, never speaks. It just watches. And on March 14th of each year, if you stand at the location where the gallows once stood behind what is now the Crawford County Historical Museum, you can sometimes hear the sound of a trap door opening, followed by sudden silence, followed by something that might be wind, but sounds distinctly like someone taking their first free breath in a very long time. Sheriff Wardell's journal ends with this entry, dated April 9th, 1871, the day after the second hanging. I have done something no lawman should ever have to do. I have executed a man twice. Once for a crime he didn't commit, and once to free him from the consequences of that injustice. I do not know if what I did was legal, moral, or sane. I know only that Samuel Pritchard is at peace now. And I know that whatever Margaret Blackwell heard whispering in her walls is still there, still waiting. The original courthouse records from 1871 show only one execution. Samuel Pritchard, March 14th. There is no mention of a second hanging, no record of what Sheriff Wardell did that April morning. But tucked into the back of the ledger, in handwriting that matches Wardell's journal, someone wrote 5 words: "Justice delayed is justice denied." And in Crawford County, where the Blackwell property still sits empty after 150 years, people understand that some debts take more than one payment to settle.